Hey, Scott from MyGrowthRings.com here for the first time is in the middle of our brand new dining room in our new home. If you're new to the channel, we're in the process of moving. I don't have easy access to my Shopsmith tools, and this channel is really built around using Shopsmith equipment. Shopsmith is a power tool manufacturer, currently manufacturing tools in Dayton, Ohio, but that line of tools has been manufactured since the 1940s. What I'm going to be doing here today is taking this brand new WEN benchtop lathe out of the box. But the point of this is my oldest grandson has taken an interest in turning, and I bought this lathe not only for him to learn on, but possibly even to take home with him. Now, there's complications involved in that. We'll get into that in a future video. So we're going to tear into this, and I'm going to show you the ins and outs of a basic benchtop lathe. So this is a WEN model 3421, which is a very small lathe. It only has an 8-inch throw and a 12-inch length capacity as it comes out of the box here, which is fine if people are just going to be turning pens, small bowls, and small spindles. We'll probably get into showing you some tips of how you could extend the range of this, but I think it's going to be a good, simple little benchtop lathe. First thing we see in here is the manual. You can download the manual from the WEN website. I would suggest you do that to make yourself familiar with this before you even receive your lathe. Now, this lathe is sold on Amazon for about $150, which is, I think, a great buy. Now, let's pull all the accessories out of here. We'll get to those in a bit. A little bit of assembly required here. Now, as you can see, this table is exactly the size of this lathe. The surface of the bed is covered with a rust-proof paper, and so that's all going to need to come off, and then we need to clean this up as well. But we need to assemble a few of the pieces in here so we can rotate the pieces and parts. So let's bring in some of these loose parts. You can see here there's a little bag that came with a couple of the wrenches or handles that are used to move the various pieces and parts of the lathe, and also the drive center and live center. We'll get into that in the main video. Now, there is a difference in the length of these bolt surfaces here. Looks to me like the short one is going to go here on the tailstock, which means the long one is going to go here on the tool rest, but we're going to have to confirm that in the instructions. That's where I believe that should go. That'll work for now. These two larger handles are identical, and they're basically wrenches that are going to be captured here and on the back of the tailstock. And these will be used for loosening and moving those parts. So you can see we can get that protective paper off of there now. The handle goes on, and then under the handle, or into the back of the handle, will go a spring, and then that spring ends up getting a bolt passed through it, and then we'll screw those together. That's going to take a screwdriver. And what that spring allows us to do, and that's on a little shoulder bolt, that spring is going to push that and engage it against the lock, and then if we need to reposition this, we can pull back, rotate that to a new position. So right now, that is locked in place, If I pull back, I can drop the handle out of the way, and it's not going to cause any interference. One of the two tool rests that's included will fit here on top. That'll drop in place, and we will adjust the height on that. Now you'll notice that that handle right now, if I had a tool, that would be the way. So you pull that back, and we can bring that handle to a location where it's not going to be bothersome. Exact same style of handle is here in the back. I can put this on just for a moment, temporarily. Loosen that, and then I can get that paper out from underneath. There we go. And now this all deserves a good cleanup. We should clean this with, typically I use paint thinner to clean these parts off. And then as you can see in my jointer rust removal video, I actually like to put a polyurethane finish, a very diluted polyurethane finish onto cast iron, followed by paste wax. You could go with straight paste wax at this point, but that's just an old habit that has served me very well. And now let me put this little wrench on the back of the tailstock. Again, same setup. You'll notice that it's kind of a funky shaped spring. It's narrow on one end and fat on the other. It's narrow so that it'll go right there under the head of that bolt, and then it goes right into the handle. And because it's a shoulder bolt, you turn that screw in all the way until it's tight, and there's still plenty of movement there. So let's walk through the basic anatomy of a lathe. Now this particular lathe has the power plant, the motor, built underneath the bed of the lathe. This fixed part right here is referred to as the headstock. Now on the Shopsmith, the headstock moves, and the opposite end of the machine is what is fixed in place. But on most wood lathes, the headstock is fixed in place. This has the on-off switch and variable speed control off to the end. Now, one thing about this lathe, I've heard through a number of comments that there is a little there's a little glass bus fuse, like the kind of fuses we used to use in our cars, that's accessible from the back where the power goes into the motor, and this lathe is said to blow those 10 amp fuses. Now, it may be just the fuse that comes with it is weak, but that's something that I'm going to make sure I have on hand. The motor then, through a belt, is powering this spindle. Now, this spindle right here is very similar to most large lathes. However, it's miniaturized. So what we have on the outside of this is a thread. This measures 1 inch in diameter, and there's 8 threads per inch. So if you're buying an accessory, such as this little fellow right here, which is a very small faceplate. Faceplates are used sometimes for turning things like bowls and platters. You might want a larger one. You might want to add a chuck to this lathe, in which case you want to make sure that it has that 1 inch bore and 8 threads per inch. Now that faceplate then just screws right on like that. Now you'll see some people on YouTube that are turning a spindle between centers, and they're doing that with this thing right here, which is called a drive spur, or just I call it a drive. And you can see that when I put this drive center in, it is wedging itself in place because it has a very tapered body to it. That's a specific taper. It's referred to as a Morse taper number 1 or a number 1 Morse taper. So for this lathe, if I were to buy something for this that would fit into the taper, I would look for a MT1 on that accessory. I do see people turning spindles with the face plate installed and the spur drive. You can do that, and one of the reasons that some folks will do that is because it helps to protect those threads. I don't typically do that, but I think if I were to do it, I might be inclined to just go ahead and put that face plate on backwards so that the large flange portion isn't going to get in the way of my chisels as I'm turning spindles. Now we can tighten the faceplate in place using a wrench, and it does come with a wrench or a spanner, as some folks like to call it. And you can see that we also have this little bar right here that is it does multiple things with this lathe. It's used for knocking out accessories. So if I have a center here that doesn't easily come out, I can bring this in from the end of the machine and just tap that out until it comes out. I can also use that right here through any of these holes to brace this while I'm adding a little bit of torque to the face plate or to a chuck. And you can see I'm bracing this against the bed of the lathe while I give this a little bit of a snug. You might want to put a little paper washer in between those parts just so that you have some give. And likewise, if I'm going to push down here, I'll put this bar down against the bed of the lathe, and that way I'm not fighting two levers. Here we have the tool rest, the part that the tool is actually going to rest on. This lathe comes with two different sizes, a small and a large. The small one appears to be about 4 inches. The large appears to be about, let's say, 6, maybe 7 inches long. This portion of the tool rest here that connects, this orange part that is connecting all of this to the bed of the lathe, is sometimes referred to as a banjo. It's interesting. It's one of those things that people don't seem to know where that name comes from. And there are some folks that like to say, oh, that was from the one-way lathe company. Now, the name banjo for this part right here has been around a lot longer than the one-way lathe company. But you can see when that's loose, I can pull this in and out, bring it closer to a spindle, for example, and I can also rotate my tool rest around any which way I want. So if I'm turning a bowl or a platter, I can bring this close, tighten everything down, and that's very, very handy. Now, on the other end of the lathe, we have the tailstock. This part, if I'm turning a spindle, needs to be able to come closer or further away from my drive center. So here's my drive center. Perhaps I'll be turning between two centers, or maybe I'll put a chuck here to hold things. But if I'm using my tailstock, I need something on this end. And this lathe comes with what's called a live center. There's a ball bearing that allows this to spin. And that is also a #1 Morse taper. And this, if I loosen this top part and turn this knob, I can advance this portion on the tailstock, and this is called the quill. And so I can get my stock in close, lock everything down, and then bring that quill out to apply the proper amount of pressure, which isn't much. A lot of folks love to over tighten things. And then we just make sure that everything gets tightened down properly. So this handle or lock right there is where it's locked. I don't like where that locks, so I can lift up and relocate that. That didn't turn the thread at all. That just put the handle out of the way. So again, I can move the tailstock, lock it in place. I can move my tool rest around, lock it in place. Right now, that tool rest is very low. Notice it's even going underneath the live center. So odds are I'm going to want to have that tool rest either roughly even with that drive center, a little below or a little above. And those are things that you learn as you turn. Okay, also, if I need to get my tailstock accessory off, this may be a live center. It may be even a chuck that I'm using for drilling. We'll show you that at some point. I can stick this same knockout bar into the back and push that right out. So very, very easy. Let's plug this in and see how she goes. I think I'm going to take the drive center out, and let's see if we give her some power. What'll happen? I'm going to turn the rheostat down to low. And because it's electronic variable speed, we do not have to worry about turning the speed down when turning the machine off. but still not a bad habit to get into, because if you take your stock off and put something new on, you might be surprised that it's going faster than you expected. So turning it down to a low speed before you turn it off is not a bad habit. Okay, remember I told you that I heard that the 10 amp fuse can blow? Well, we were just turning and it turned off. So let's see if that's our issue. We'll have to look at a bus fuse, looking for the wire inside. Now I think it's okay. So there is a thermal overload on here. So we're just going to let her cool down a bit and see if that's the issue. We've been turning nonstop here for an hour. We'll find out. All right, give that a flip there, Davis. And there we go. We're back in business. Just need to cool down a little bit. Now you'll also see that right on this label here is information about the lathe that tells you exactly what thread, it tells you exactly what the Morse tapers are in the various parts. So for some reason you were to lose your manual, you still have all the information you would need here for adding accessories. Speaking of accessories, I've already picked up for my grandson a pen mandrel as well as a chuck. Now, you do not have to purchase a specific pen mandrel to turn pens. I could have purchased one from Penn State Industries. I could have purchased just a generic one, but I'm going to go ahead and go with the WEN brand of products just for compatibility's sake, and we'll see how these things work out. Again, in a future video, we'll put these to use with my grandson and see how they work out. When you look at a lathe, the lathes are sized with a certain number configuration, and you will see that they'll say an 8-inch by 12-inch with this particular lathe. What that means is this lathe can have something that is 8 inches in diameter and up to 12 inches in length mounted on it. Now keep in mind that means 4 inches from the center of the drive to the bed. So it's a pretty small throw as far as lathes are concerned. And this lathe, if I were turning something that size, I would be sure that I have this thing bolted down to something solid. So that's it. I hope that wasn't painful for my normal channel viewers. Hope that was of some interest to you. We will do a follow-up if you have any questions about this machine. And we'll, in the future at some point, do a video with my grandson, Smuckers, as I like to call him, as he learns to do some pen turning on this lathe. I look forward to that. I hope you two do too. Make it a great day. See you again soon. That you really need to kind of go in and then in and then in. I know you don't want to make a big cove, but that's called chatter. And the chatter is just telling you it's tearing up the wood. Go ahead, do it again.
So back off a little bit.
Yeah, not so aggressively. Take your time. Put it from one side then the other. Always moving from big diameter to small.